What is representation, and why is it important? Why did I choose this topic to explore? How do I begin integrating it effectively into my classroom, and what would that even look like? What considerations should be made? How does it affect students, and how does it tie into the curriculum? How do I integrate representation into my classroom respectfully? Representation is defined as the action of speaking or acting on behalf of someone or the state of being so represented. Now, when we look at representation in terms of teaching and its place in the classroom, though, it takes on a slightly more focused meaning, allowing children the opportunity to see their future selves in a positive light. It means providing role models and a positive affirmation of identity. While I might look like a Caucasian male on the outside, I'm actually a member of the invisible race, the Métis. In grade 6, I fondly remember a portion of our year was dedicated to reading a collection of stories from Indigenous culture regarding their spiritual beliefs and origin stories. This was the most engaging learning I experienced throughout my time in elementary school. I saw myself in those stories, and they hold an important place in my heart to this day. In seeing myself in those stories, my wonder was activated. We, as teachers, should strive to activate this same engagement through our own content choices. Before we can begin the process of integrating representation into our classroom, we need to establish just who it is that composes our class. Making judgment calls about students based on how they look outwardly would be a mistake, albeit one made with good intentions. No, engaging with our learners through a lesson, exploring our roots and identity, paints a much stronger portrait from which we can extrapolate just what kind of custom choices we might make moving forward. Once we've established who our learners are, their histories and cultures, we can begin to adjust our classroom content to better represent their individual identities. Because literacy is such an important and routine aspect of learning, especially at a young age, choosing books with characters who share cultural identities with our learners is a great first step. Representation in the classroom, though, can be so much more. When we put posters on our walls or discuss important historical figures, for instance. History, however, is often recorded in a biased fashion. How many posters of Jean Couthan Goodwill, the first Cree woman to complete a nursing program in 1958 and founder of the Aboriginal Nursing Association of Canada, have any of us seen in our own educations? By addressing historical oversight, we can draw from a wellspring of racially diverse role models conducive to the emotional health of our diversified classrooms. We can also address representation through the toys and games we provide in our classroom. Dolls and costumes should be racially diverse, for instance. And remember that even decisions as simple as to which colored markers are available can be inroads to inclusion. Now, representation isn't strictly limited to these tangible visual mediums. Johnson portends that inclusive representation should strive to account for a wide variety of factors. We can foster a positive atmosphere of inclusion through our curriculum itself, molding our lessons to reflect our various learners through the scenarios we attach to them, by carefully selecting guest speakers, and by providing time in class for social-emotional learning. By having regularly scheduled emotional check-ins and sharing time, we can nurture a space wherein student identity thrives. When one thinks of representation, often one's mind envisions race and culture. Though it isn't limited strictly to these factors, students with learning disabilities, for instance, typically see very little representation within classrooms. Physical disabilities, such as wheelchair-bound students, or those with impaired vision or hearing, benefit from representation as well. It isn't uncommon either to find students questioning their gender and sexuality, even at young ages. Sexuality is a perfectly reasonable and healthy subject to address, so having representation of homosexuality and gender fluidity in our classrooms is a natural choice. In writing for the National Council of Teachers of English, Herman Wilmarth stipulates that we have a duty to include everyone, even elementary school students, in our addressment of sexuality. Even if many established teachers find this subject uncomfortable, I'm confident that in time and with practice, we can learn to adjust our ways of thinking to accommodate for this need, growing both as educators and as adults. White addresses one of the reasons why inclusion and representation is important in our teaching. Educators need to be aware of the conflicts that may arise due to cultural misunderstandings and linguistic differences. Because of these factors, he writes, not all students are equally adept at class participation, nor are all students equally prone to participate. Another reason representation is so important in our classrooms is because through it we can activate the full potential of would-be learners. Thomas, in Writings for Edutopia, informs us that children's early experiences, including the hours spent consuming media, shape what they imagine to be possible for people who look like them, live where they live, or come from where they came from. Egelite, Casita, and Winters provide evidence for the effect of racial representation through their research, proving that students taught by teachers of their same race show a marked improvement in their retention. By providing role models with whom our students can relate, even simply on a visual level, we can help to improve their learning. As far as the curriculum goes, representation is rather malleable. As Johnson stated, we can incorporate examples of representation directly into a plethora of disciplines depending on how we shape the information presented. As the BCTF states, our autonomy as teachers is not merely a fundamental requirement of quality education, but for creating students to become engaged and politically active democratic citizens as well. Using our autonomy, we have full license to customize and deliver the curriculum how we deem it will be most efficient and productive. A large part of the BCTF's 9th standard directly recognizes that learner identity plays an enormous role in mental and spiritual health. The last point I'd like to discuss today deals with the somewhat daunting aspect of integrating cultures that aren't our own into our teaching while doing so in a respectful manner. As role models ourselves, it is of profound importance that we take great care not to overstep our bounds. As there is no hard and fast regulatory set of guidelines when it comes to representation, our practices therein, much like our practices in our own private lives, are left to our own discretion. Use your best judgment and act accordingly. Should you overstep and include cultural learnings that are deemed inappropriate, remove the content and reevaluate, addressing the issue and using it as a teaching opportunity. While important to include Indigenous teachings and history within our classrooms, it is of equal import to seek out permission for their use when applicable. While most Indigenous teachings and stories are welcome to be shared with the general public, some stories are inherently tied to particular bands and hold great cultural significance. If one seeks to include such a story, it is important to discuss their use with local elders and chieftains. Representation isn't tricky, nor is it difficult. We should all endeavor to include all of our young learners, and to show them that the world is a rainbow.